let's just take an example of someone getting from 200 kilo deadlift to 400 kilo deadlift. And we're going to talk about all the different things you're going to need to do and the expectations and time frames and stuff. So first thing I want to talk about is the time frame of getting someone from 200 to 400 kilos. Now, for most people, it's going to be a couple of long year process. It's not going to happen overnight. Yes, there are going to be some freaks out there that can achieve it in 12 months, 16 months or something, but for the most part, we need to accept that strength training is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and we need to understand that, and we need to just accept that fact and set a realistic time frame to achieve these goals. Now, to get started, to get from 200 to 400 kilo, right, we need to look at some 400 kilo deadlifters, and we need to just think to ourselves, what do they all have in common? Now, very rarely will a 400 kilo deadlifter have bad technique. They'll always be really efficient, they'll have always mastered their mechanics, and they'll always be in a safe position, shall we say. Now, safe doesn't necessarily mean straight back, by the way, but it means they're in a consistent position all year round. So the first thing to know, whether you're a 200 kilo deadlifter, 100 kilo deadlifter, 300 kilo, whatever phase you're at, we need to make sure that your technique is perfect. So I'm going to use the example that you're a 200 kilo deadlifter, okay? And we'll start from there and we'll build up. So the next goal of a 200 kilo deadlifter is to get to 220 kilos. So what training principles is the best to apply? What structure, what frequency, etc. to get from 200 to 220? That's usually the first milestone, 5 plates. Well, we always need to take into account load, frequency, and volume. So load, how much weight's on the bar, 200 kilos roughly. Frequency, how many times a week are we doing it? And volume, how many reps and sets are we accumulating over the training week? So we need to accept that you can't do all three at once, okay? We can't lift heavy load with high frequency, with high volume. So that 200 kilo deadlifter, he can't lift 90%, 180 kilo. He can't do that 5 times a week, and he can't do it for like 5 sets of 5 times a week. We need to pick 2 of them. So for a 200 kilo puller getting to 220, we want to stick with volume and we want to stick with frequency. And we want the load to be slightly pulled back a little bit. Now, the reason for that is because 200 kilo deadlifter, usually they don't have that many reps and sets under the belt. You know, obviously there's some people that have a lower starting point, but your average male is going to pull like 150 kilo roughly first time they try, if you're in like your 20s or something and you're fully matured. So it's only a 50 kilo increase from a starting point. So it doesn't take that long to achieve it. You can kind of get it in your newbie gain stage. So usually when I see 200 kilo deadlifters, the form's not very polished. So it's much better to stay at lower loads with higher volume and higher frequency. So we're doing more reps across the week. So we're able to build up good technique, because practice makes perfect. Just like in any sport, the deadlift is something we need to practice and perfect. So for me, to get to 200 to 220, I'll be looking at 8 to 10 week phase, and I will be looking to do at least twice a week, probably maybe 3 times, 2 a little heavier, 1 really light, deadlift sessions per week, with enough volume that we're accumulating at least 25 working reps per set, per session. And the reason for that, like I say, is so that we can get good and master the mechanics, master our position, master everything. So where are our feet at, where are our shoulders at, how are we bracing, what cues are we using to execute this lift. We can master all these things if we do it more. Now, once you structure out your 8 to 10 week block, by doing all these things and mastering your technique and doing more volume, you're probably going to get to 220 fairly easily. And the next goal then is to get to 250 kilos. If you're a kilo man, or if you're a pounds man, people look at the 272, 600 pound goal. Now, I like to break it down into plates personally. I like to go 260. Because we're kind of middle ground of 250 and 272, and we're also, 1 plate away from 300 kilos. So the next goal to get from 220 to 260, we need to just accept that now most of our reps and sets are going to be close to the 200 kilo mark, or maybe even around 200, which is our old max before we did that first phase. So now we need to accept that the load is a little bit higher. So the frequency and volume need to be pulled back ever so slightly. And also at this stage, we need to be able to have a keen eye for weaknesses. So my next phase of training to get from 220 to 260 would usually be twice a week instead of the 3 times. And one of the sessions would be focused on a weakness and the other session focused on the actual specific lift. So you could do a linear periodization method on day 1, where you're just maybe doing 4 sets of 5, adding a couple of kilo each week. Again, we're looking at stretching this to kind of 16, 20 weeks to be able to get to 260. So we can have a long stretch of linear progression on day 1. And then day 2 would be more focused on a weakness. So for example, if you were struggling at lockout because your glutes and hamstrings were lacking in terms of strength, we might do a stiff leg deadlift. Or we might do a deficit deadlift for the extra range of motion. Or we might have added assistance exercises in, like the prone ham curl, the GHD back extension. So as you can see, the training to get to a 260 area deadlift is a little bit different to getting to like a 220. And this is a common trend with going forward into getting stronger, is your training needs to be progressive so that it takes into account the fact you're going to be lifting more weight every time. Now, let's say we've done this weak area training, we've done the linear progression and whatnot, we've peaked our lift properly, and you've hit a deadlift and you get 260, 270 over a course of like a 20-week block, say. So now we've done 10 weeks at the start and then 20 weeks there, with 30 weeks in. You know, we've done a good 7-8 months of training there. Like I say, it's a long-term goal. It's not something that happens straight away. And everyone's going to progress at different weights. You know, we need to take into account body weight. We need to take into account nutrition and sleep, and if the person is willing or wants to use PEDs or not. There's loads of things to take into account when it comes to this progression speed. So you might need to do 2 phases of this style of training. You know what I mean? You might only get to 240 or 250 this time round. And then you might need to do another 20 weeks where you pick a new weak area and you pick a different linear periodization model for the first day. So this is a very generalized advice, and everyone's going to progress differently, but it just gives you an insight into what to expect going forward into getting really strong. Now, the next phase is obviously getting up to that big 300 kilo deadlift. This is a big long-term goal for people, and the training for the 300 again is usually a little different than training for the 260 or the 220. The reason being is because at this point in time, if you're the lucky guy that's got to 260 in 30 weeks, the 10-week phase and the 20-week phase, if you're that lucky guy, like I say, most people will probably be, you know, another 10, 15 weeks on top of that. But you've got lots of reps under your belt now. So someone who goes to pull 300 usually has very polished form. They don't have a glaring weakness because they've worked on the weaknesses up to, you know, getting to the 260 mark. And they've got quite a well-balanced deadlift, a balanced pull, which means that really the focus only needs to be on getting stronger. So at this point in your lifting career, you need to look at other modalities of getting stronger. So you need to start looking at your nutrition really in depth. Like, are you recovering from the training? Because like I said, the load is going up, so recovery demand is getting higher. When recovery demand's higher, we can't do as much volume, as much frequency. Make sense? So, by the way, if any of this stuff is going a little bit over your head, is getting a little bit like, I don't know what the hell's going on, just click the little box below, go to the next page, and you'll have an in-depth video of a full training structured week and a little bit more information for you there. So just click the little box below if you're struggling. So going on to this 300 kilo deadlift, after we've looked at nutrition strategies and stuff like that, and sleep and supplements, we need to start looking at the training specifically. And here is where lower volume training comes into play. So one top set, you'll often see lifters online doing one top set. You know, they'll hit like, you know, 250 for 5 as their top set for the day, because when load starts getting higher, volume can go lower, which means you don't need to do 5 sets of 5 or whatever to accumulate that strength stimulus to get that adaptation to get stronger. So here is where we need to make use of both load or intensity, people like to call it, and volume at the same time. So this is where I like to do one day where we do a top set, and the goal there is to just constantly be hitting PBs, whether it be by 1 kilo or 5 kilo, whatever happens. Go in and take an 8 rep max or a 5 rep max or a 3 rep max or a 2 rep max, and just keep chipping away at really high intensity rep maxes. Big mistake you can make here is shooting your load too early. If you haven't, say you pull 270 and you haven't done a heavy 5 since you pulled 220 for 5, and in your head you're thinking, I could probably do 240 for 5. Don't go and do 240 for 5 session 1. Do 222.5 for 5 reps. 2.5 kilo PB. Even though it's easy, that's good, because then we can go 225 next time, 227, 230, 232, 235. There's 8 weeks of progression there that you've skipped by shooting your load too early. If you pull that 240 for 5, where are you going to go from there? You know what I mean? You're not going to get stronger in 1 week, so you can't just go 240, 2.5 the next week. You know what I mean? So you don't want to shoot your load too early. You want to make sure your rep sets on this day are the PBs, but we don't need to take every gram that you've got straight away. We can just chip away at it. And then day 2, this is where we drop the load and we up the volume a little bit. And again, we'll usually use some kind of exercise rotation. So we'll try and find, at this point in time in your lifting career, we'll try and find something you've not done before. So whether it's 18-inch deadlifts or 15-inch deadlifts, deficit deadlifts, snatch grip deadlifts, you know what I mean? There's hundreds of variations we can pick. We'll pick that and we'll do volume on it so that we're able to strengthen positions that we haven't been in before, get a novel stimulus, and hopefully over the next kind of 20 weeks we're able to push from 260 all the way up to 300 plus kilos. Now, once you get to the 300 mark, to get further, to get to like 350, this is where it starts to get a bit grindy and a bit gritty, and we've got to just start accepting these micro gains for most people. So here, training from kind of 300 to 340 area, it doesn't really need to change drastically from the training from 260 to 300. You're just going to make use of that second day better. So you're going to really use, really push variations that you haven't used before. Really try to progress on things that you're just not very good at. So whether that be bent over rows, whether it be back extensions, hamstring curls, stiff leg deadlifts, snatch, whatever you think I'm terrible at them, session 2 should always be what you're worst at in terms of variation of that specific lift. Again, we can even dive into like back squat and stuff here. Like if your deadlifts progressed really rapidly and your high bar back squat or your safety bar back squat is lacking, you need to add that in, prioritize that on that second session, because if we start to bring everything up, it'll also carry the deadlift up. Rising tide lifts all boats. That's a phrase, isn't it, Joe? Yeah. There you go. Good info for you there. Anyway, as we go into the 300 to 340 range, you're going to just have to take it on chin. It's going to take a while. It's going to take most people a year or so. And you've got to remember, like, all this time we've been training, the things that most coaches won't tell you is, you might have started this journey at 200 kilos, and you might have been 22 years old, living with your parents, have a shitty little job that just pays you enough, low stress, and now you're 3-5 years down the line, and you've got your own place, you've got bills to pay, you've got a stressful job, you might have a dog, kids. What I'm trying to say is, environment changes. So for you to have progress that's quick and somewhat linear, you need to be able to adapt to your environment. So training, not many people are going to pull 350 deadlift if the training is not a priority. So as your life evolves, as you get older, as your whole environment changes, you need to just adapt to it and make sure that the people that are surrounding your environment, your missus, your work, etc., are supportive of you and are going to get you in this direction. Because if they're not, this is the number one reason why people struggle to get into that 400 kilo range. Because if you don't have an amazing environment and support network around you, it doesn't matter what program you're on, you're not going to be able to achieve it. So as you grow and get older, make sure you make smart choices with who you hang around with. Make sure your gym partners are good. Make sure your friends are good and they're supporting you. Your missus, your family, your job, you know what I mean? If all these things, if they all want you to do well in your sport and get strong as fuck, then you're going to be able to get there. If everything's always holding you back, you know, if you're like, oh, work's put me on 12-hour days for the next 6 weeks, then yeah, you're going to struggle to get strong. You might decline in that time. You know, if your missus is like, do you have to go to the gym tonight? Can you skip the session? You know, you're going to struggle to achieve your goals. So that's a really important point that I want to make there, is as you're getting older, just make sure you surround yourself with similar like-minded people and you'll be able to get where you want to go. You know what I mean? You don't see rich people hanging around with poor people all the time, do you? You know, if they do, the poor people tend to make loads of money and everyone's rich. It's just everybody kind of works with each other. It's just how it works. So going on from there, after we've hit this 350, again, like I say, similar principles to getting to 300 kilos, we need to now look at getting to 400 kilos. Now, this is where training needs to change quite drastically. And the reason being is because when you start getting into this 400 kilo range, the load, that first stimulus point we talk about, so we've got load, we've got frequency, we've got volume, remember, if you don't understand these things, click the little box, yeah? I'll go into another video, all in depth, full training structure and everything, so just click the little box if this is all going over your head and you're thinking this guy's chatting bollocks, click the box. Load is ramped really high, so volume and frequency need to be managed really, really well, because if you don't, you're going to really underperform in like half your sessions. So this is where I like to use a bi-weekly rotation with people, where they start to deadlift heavy week 1 and lighter week 2. So only usually once a week I'll get these people to pull. Now, you can pull twice a week if you wanted to, but you'd have to get your recovery from elsewhere. So you might need to drop out back squat, or you might need, say you're a strongman, you're log pressing, you might need to drop out log press or yoke or events or something like high recovery demanding things. You might need to drop out to prioritize your deadlift if you want to do it twice a week. If you do it twice a week, yes, your deadlift will progress faster, but obviously you're going to regress in other areas that you're not training. So that's kind of like a personal choice. It depends what you want. If you're just dead set on a 400 kilo deadlift and that's like your goal for this year, then I would take the hit and drop the yoke out, drop log out, etc., and just focus on the deadlift. But if you're trying to do these things whilst competing year round, you need to obviously, you can't drop log and events out and stuff. So once a week, rotating through is fine. And again, loads high, let's keep it high. Week 1 would be a top set. Same principle as what I said before about trying to sneak these PBs, but it's just one set. Sneak the little PB, so you might pull 330 for 5. Then the next week, we go to what the old second session used to be, you know, the lower load, higher volume. So it might be like 260 for 6 sets of 3 the week after. And then the week after that might be 350 for 2. And the week after that, we just ramp the volume a bit. So we do 265 for 6 sets of 3. You can see the kind of trend and principles we're going through, but you need to accept that you can't deadlift heavy every week at this point, unless you get those recovery demands from elsewhere by taking out log and stuff like that. So going forward up to the 400 kilo deadlift, as you can see, to get from 350 to 400, the training principle is almost the opposite of getting from 200 to 220. That guy's deadlifting 3 times a week with loads of volume, loads of frequency. The guy going from 350 to 400 is deadlifting heavy every other week. Now, I actually say to my clients, that's a reward for getting stronger, because it's almost like, it's almost less work, you know what I mean? And it's more fun. To be able to come in the gym and pull one set heavy and just go all out, get hyped, pre-worked out if you know, and just lift a big weight, and then you're done. You've done enough stimulus to create an adaptation to get stronger. Then you can fuck off, basically. It's great. Whereas when you're first starting out, you've got to put in all the volume, all the frequency, you've got to put in all the hard graft. You've got to do your time in the trenches, you know what I mean? Thank you for listening to me ramble on for what I think is maybe 20 minutes of information. Hopefully you took something from it. You might not even listen to this bit. You might have just watched the first half. You might have thought, I'll just stick to the bit up to 300. I hope you took something from it. I hope you learned something. If you're struggling to apply or you don't really understand the things I've been talking about, like I've said 3 or 4 times, click that little box and you go to another video about the MST bot that'll break down a full weekly structure, and I think it'll be really helpful for you. So make sure you do that. If not, enjoy applying these principles. and see you in 5 years when you pull 400.